The photograph was 17 years old, but Judge Warren Bledsoe recognized himself immediately. He was younger in the image, thinner, his hair still dark, his smile wide and careless. He stood outside a hunting cabin in Defiance County, one arm slung around the shoulders of a man he'd spent 2 decades pretending he'd never met. The cabin behind them had burned down 11 years ago. He'd made sure of that himself. But here it was, glossy and undeniable, sitting in a manila envelope on his desk at the Paulding County Courthouse in Northwest Ohio, placed there sometime between his lunch recess and his 2 o'clock docket. No note, no demands, just the photograph. And underneath it, a single business card. The name on the card was Dale Raymond Purcell. Bledsoe's hand trembled as he picked it up. He hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in almost 3 years. Not since the day he'd sentenced Dale Purcell to 18 months in the county jail for criminal trespass and destruction of property. Not since he'd denied every motion his public defender filed. Not since he'd looked down from the bench at a 62-year-old man with a bad leg and a worse cough, and told him that people like him were the reason small towns rotted from the inside. He remembered the exact words he'd used. "You're not a victim, Mr. Purcell. You're a parasite, and this court has no sympathy for parasites." Dale Purcell had said nothing, just stared up at him with pale gray eyes that didn't blink, didn't plead, didn't even look surprised. At the time, Bledsoe had taken that silence as surrender. Now, holding this photograph, he understood it was something else entirely. It was patience. The photograph showed Bledsoe and Gerald Moyer standing in front of that cabin. Gerald Moyer, who'd been the county prosecutor back then. Gerald Moyer, who'd steered 3 construction contracts to Bledsoe's brother-in-law in exchange for cash payments that passed through a shell company in Toledo. Gerald Moyer, who died of a heart attack in 2019 and taken his secrets to a grave in Antwerp Cemetery. Bledsoe had believed those secrets died with him. But someone had been at that cabin. Someone had taken this picture through the trees, capturing them mid-laugh, Gerald's hand gesturing toward the stack of documents on the hood of his truck. Documents that detailed the entire arrangement. Bledsoe turned the photograph over. On the back, written in careful blue ink, were 3 words. "I kept copies." His phone buzzed, a text from his clerk. "Your 3 o'clock is here. Dale Purcell, petition for expungement." Bledsoe read the message twice, then a third time. His mouth went dry. Dale Purcell was in his courthouse, right now, sitting in the gallery, waiting for him to take the bench. Waiting to see if the judge who had destroyed his life understood what was about to happen. Bledsoe stood up. His legs felt weak. He walked to his window and looked down at the parking lot, half expecting to see police cruisers, FBI vehicles, some visible sign that the world had already shifted beneath him. But there was nothing, just pickups and sedans baking in the August heat, a woman walking her dog past the courthouse lawn, the same view he'd seen every afternoon for 12 years. He had options. He could recuse himself, claim a conflict of interest, hand the case to Judge Whitmore down the hall and pray that Dale Purcell's silence could be bought or threatened or outlasted. But if he recused himself, questions would follow. Why would a senior judge step away from a simple expungement petition? The local paper had already run 2 pieces on courthouse inefficiency. Any irregularity drew attention now. And attention was the one thing Warren Bledsoe could not afford. He straightened his robe, checked his reflection in the glass, smoothed his silver hair. Then he walked out to face the man he'd buried. The courtroom was nearly empty. A bailiff stood by the side door. The court reporter sat at her machine, fingers poised. The fluorescent lights hummed their familiar drone. And in the front row alone sat Dale Purcell. He looked worse than Bledsoe remembered. Thinner, older. His left leg was braced with a metal support that hadn't been there 3 years ago. His suit was clean but 20 years out of style, The kind of thing a man retrieves from the back of his closet when he has nowhere else to turn. But his eyes were exactly the same, pale gray, unblinking, patient. Bledsoe took the bench. His hands gripped the edge of his desk to hide their trembling. Case number 24 CV0847, the clerk announced. In the matter of Dale Raymond Purcell, petitioner, seeking expungement of criminal conviction under Ohio, Revised Code 2953.32. Bledsoe nodded, kept his voice steady. Is the petitioner present? Dale Purcell rose slowly, favoring his bad leg. I am, Your Honor. And you're proceeding pro se, without legal representation. That's correct. Bledsoe glanced at the file in front of him. Standard expungement request. First-time felony offender, eligible after 3 years. Purcell had completed his sentence, paid his fines, satisfied every requirement. By the letter of the law, this petition should be granted. By the letter of the law, Warren Bledsoe should have no reason to deny it. Mr. Purcell, Bledsoe said, before we proceed, I want to note for the record that I presided over your original case. If you have any objection to my handling this petition, you may request reassignment. He held his breath. This was the moment. If Purcell wanted leverage, wanted to make demands, he would refuse reassignment. He would force Bledsoe to sit through this hearing, knowing what was coming. Dale Purcell looked up at him, held his gaze for a long moment. No objection, Your Honor. Bledsoe's stomach dropped. He'd expected threats, demands, some kind of negotiation. Instead, Purcell was just going to stand there, going to make him say yes or no, with that photograph sitting on his desk 3 doors away, going to watch him decide whether justice meant anything when his own skin was on the line. Very well, Bledsoe managed. You may proceed with your statement. Dale Purcell nodded. He didn't have notes, didn't need them. 3 years ago, he began, his voice low and worn, I was convicted of criminal trespass and destruction of property. I broke into a storage facility on Route 111 and damaged several file boxes belonging to a company called Moyer Holdings, LLC. Bledsoe kept his face neutral. Moyer Holdings, Gerald's company, the Shell Corporation. I committed those acts, Purcell continued. I don't deny it. I knew what I was doing when I did it. Then why did you do it, Mr. Purcell? The question came out before Bledsoe could stop it. He hadn't planned to ask, hadn't wanted to know, but something about the way Purcell stood there, calm and certain, made him need to understand. Purcell looked at him. Really looked at him. Because I knew what was in those boxes, Your Honor, and I knew no one was ever going to look unless I made them. Bledsoe's mouth went dry. Those boxes contained financial records, Purcell said, payment logs, contracts, correspondence between Gerald Moyer and various county officials dating back to 2004, evidence of bid rigging on public construction projects, kickbacks paid through a company in Toledo, money that came from taxpayers and went into private pockets. The court reporter's fingers had stopped moving. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably by the door. Bledsoe cleared his throat. Mr. Purcell, this petition concerns your expungement request, not unrelated allegations. Do you have anything further to add regarding your eligibility under the statute? I do, Purcell said. I'd like the court to know that I've maintained copies of everything I found in that storage unit, not the originals. Those were destroyed in a fire I had nothing to do with, but photocopies, photographs, enough to reconstruct the entire paper trail. He reached into his jacket pocket. Bledsoe's heart seized. But Purcell only withdrew a single sheet of paper. He held it up. This is a sworn affidavit, he said, prepared by a retired FBI agent named Marcus Tanner, currently residing in Columbus. It attests to the authenticity and legal significance of the materials in my possession. Mr. Tanner has reviewed the documents and believes they provide sufficient basis for a federal investigation into public corruption in Paulding County. Bledsoe gripped the bench. His knuckles went white. Mr. Purcell, this is highly irregular. If you have evidence of criminal wrongdoing, the appropriate venue is law enforcement, not an expungement hearing. I understand that, Your Honor. I'll be taking that step shortly, but I wanted you to know first. The words hung in the air. I wanted you to know first. Bledsoe stared at the man in front of him, tried to read his face, tried to find the angle, the demand, the price. But Dale Purcell wasn't negotiating. He wasn't threatening. He was just standing there holding an affidavit, telling the truth in open court. And that was the worst possible thing he could do. Because if Purcell had wanted money, Bledsoe could have found a way. If he'd wanted revenge, there were methods to contain that. If he'd wanted anything at all, there would be room to maneuver. But Dale Purcell didn't want anything. He just wanted the record to reflect what had happened. Your Honor, Purcell said, I spent 18 months in county jail. I lost my house, my car, and most of my savings paying fines and legal fees. My wife divorced me while I was inside. My son hasn't spoken to me since the sentencing. He paused, adjusted his leg brace. I'm 65 years old. I have stage 2 kidney disease and chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder from 30 years working in a plastics factory. I'm not looking for revenge. I'm just looking to clear my name so I can spend whatever time I have left without a felony following me around. He looked directly at Bledsoe. I'm asking you to grant this petition, not because of what I know, but because I've earned it. Bledsoe said nothing. The silence stretched. The court reporter looked up uncertain. The bailiff coughed. Mr. Purcell, Bledsoe finally said, his voice hoarse, I'm going to take a brief recess. We'll reconvene in 30 minutes. He didn't wait for a response. He rose from the bench and walked as calmly as he could toward his chambers, feeling Dale Purcell's gray eyes on his back every step of the way. The door closed behind him. He locked it. Then Warren Bledsoe, senior judge of the Paulding County Court of Common Pleas, sat down at his desk and tried to remember how to breathe. The photograph was still there, the business card still beside it. I kept copies. He picked up his phone. His first instinct was to call his lawyer, but his lawyer was Carl Whitford, who'd handled the original property transactions, who knew where some of the money had gone. Carl was compromised. Carl was a liability. His second instinct was to call his brother-in-law, Dennis, but Dennis had built half the county's new roads with those rigged contracts. Dennis would panic. Dennis would make things worse. His third instinct was to call his wife. But what would he say? Helen, I've been lying to you for 17 years. Helen, everything we have, the house, the boat, the place on the lake, came from money I took from people who couldn't fight back. Helen, a man I destroyed is sitting in my courtroom right now, and he has the power to end me, and the only thing he wants is to be left alone. He couldn't say any of that. So he sat there, phone in hand, and said nothing at all. After 15 minutes, he made a decision. He would grant the expungement. He would sign the order. He would pretend this was a normal case handled by a normal judge, and he would hope, with every fiber of his being, that Dale Purcell meant what he said about not wanting revenge. But he knew, even as he thought it, that hope wasn't a strategy. Because Purcell had mentioned Marcus Tanner, a retired FBI agent, someone who'd already reviewed the documents, someone who believed there was enough for a federal investigation. That wasn't a bluff, that wasn't leverage, that was preparation. Dale Purcell wasn't trying to scare him into anything. He was simply going to tell the truth and let the consequences land where they landed. And the worst part, the part Bledsoe couldn't stop thinking about, was that he remembered exactly how he'd treated this man 3 years ago. The sentencing hearing had lasted 45 minutes. Purcell's public defender, a kid fresh out of law school, had requested leniency, had pointed out that his client was a first-time offender with health problems and no prior record, had noted that the storage facility belonged to a defunct company and that the property damage totaled less than $800. Bledsoe had listened to none of it. He'd seen the name Moyer Holdings on the paperwork and felt a cold fear grip his chest. He'd understood immediately that this man had stumbled onto something dangerous, and he decided in that moment to make an example of him. Not because Dale Purcell deserved it, because Warren Bledsoe was afraid. He remembered the words he'd used: parasite, rot, sympathy. He remembered the way Purcell had stood there, silent and still, absorbing every insult like a man who'd learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. He remembered feeling powerful. Now, 17 years of secrets sat in a manila envelope on his desk, and a dying man with a bad leg waited in his courtroom for simple justice. Bledsoe picked up the photograph again. He looked at his younger self, the careless smile, the arm around Gerald Moyer's shoulders. He'd been so sure back then that no one was watching, that the rules only applied to other people, that a man with the right title and the right connections could do whatever he wanted without consequence. He understood now how wrong he'd been. Not because he was about to be caught, because he'd already been caught 17 years ago by a man he'd never even noticed standing in the trees. At 3:47 p.m., Judge Warren Bledsoe returned to the bench. Dale Purcell was exactly where he'd left him, still standing, still patient, still watching. "Mr. Purcell," Bledsoe said, "I've reviewed your petition and the supporting documentation." Purcell nodded. Under Ohio Revised Code 2953.32, you are eligible for expungement. You have completed your sentence, satisfied all financial obligations, and maintained a clean record since your release. He paused, his throat was tight. The petition is granted. This court orders that the record of your conviction be sealed, and that you may lawfully state that no such conviction exists. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Dale Purcell exhaled. It was a small sound, barely audible, the sound of a man setting down something he'd carried for a very long time. "Thank you, Your Honor." Bledsoe nodded. He couldn't speak. Purcell turned to leave. He moved slowly, favoring his braced leg, his footsteps quiet on the worn courtroom floor. When he reached the door, he stopped. "Your Honors." Bledsoe looked up. Purcell didn't turn around. He just stood there, one hand on the door frame, his back to the bench. "I wasn't lying," he said. "I'm going to contact Agent Tanner this evening. He's expecting my call. The documents will be in federal hands by the end of the week." Bledsoe's stomach turned to ice. "I'm not doing this because of what you did to me," Purcell continued. "I'm doing it because of what you did to everyone else. The contracts you rigged cost this county millions, schools that didn't get built, roads that fell apart, services that got cut because the money went into someone's pocket." He paused. "You called me a parasite, Your Honor. Said people like me were the reason small towns rot from the inside." He turned then, looked directly at Bledsoe. "I think you had that backwards." He walked out. The door swung shut behind him. The courtroom was empty now. The court reporter had stopped typing. The bailiff stood frozen by the wall. Bledsoe sat motionless on the bench. He didn't call for a recess, didn't dismiss the staff, didn't move at all. He just sat there in the silence and waited for the world to end. It started 3 days later. Federal agents appeared at the Paulding County Courthouse on a Tuesday morning. They arrived without sirens, without fanfare. Just 2 dark sedans and 6 men in suits who walked through the front entrance like they owned the building. By noon, they had seized files from 6 offices. By 3 o'clock, they had interviewed 4 county employees. By 5 o'clock, Dennis Bledsoe, the judge's brother-in-law, was in federal custody. Warren Bledsoe learned about the arrest from his wife. Helen called him at his office, her voice shaking, demanding to know what was happening. He told her he didn't know. He told her there must be some mistake. He lied to her one last time. The indictment came down 2 weeks later. 18 counts: conspiracy to commit fraud, bribery, money laundering, obstruction of justice. The list went on for 3 pages. Warren Bledsoe was named as a co-conspirator. His photograph appeared on the front page of the Toledo Blade. The same wide smile, the same careless eyes, but this time the caption read, "Paulding County Judge implicated in federal corruption probe." He resigned from the bench the next morning. His lawyer advised him not to make any public statements. His wife moved to her sister's house in Cleveland. His son stopped returning his calls. He spent the following months in a kind of suspended animation, waiting for the knock on the door, waiting for the handcuffs, waiting for the moment when everything he'd built would finally collapse. But the moment didn't come. At least, not in the way he expected. The federal prosecutors offered him a deal, full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. They wanted the bigger fish, the contractors and politicians who'd built their careers on stolen money. They needed someone who could testify to the inner workings of the scheme. Someone who'd been there from the beginning. Warren Bledsoe spent 3 days considering the offer. He walked the halls of his empty house. He sat on his back porch and watched the sun set over fields he'd once believed he deserved. And on the 3rd night, he picked up the phone and called Marcus Tanner. The retired FBI agent listened without interrupting. When Bledsoe finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Why are you calling me?" Tanner finally asked. "You have lawyers for this." "Because I want to know something," Bledsoe said, "and I don't think my lawyers will give me the truth." "What do you want to know?" Bledsoe closed his eyes. Did he plan all of this, Purcell? Did he set this whole thing up? The storage unit, the fire, the copies, the timing of the expungement petition. Was this revenge? Tanner was quiet for a moment. "I've known Dale Purcell for 12 years, he said. "We served together. Different units, but the same war. He's the most patient man I've ever met, but he's not a schemer. He doesn't think in terms of revenge." "Then why did he do it?" "Because it was wrong," Tanner said, "and he couldn't let it stand." Bledsoe opened his eyes. He broke into that storage unit because he'd heard rumors about Gerald Moyer for years, knew something wasn't right. When he found those documents, he made copies because he didn't trust the system to do the right thing. And he was right not to trust it. You proved that when you sent him to prison for finding the truth. But why wait? Why sit on the evidence for 3 years? Because he was sick, and in jail, and his life was falling apart. He didn't have the strength to fight, so he did what he could. He waited, he healed, and when he was ready, he walked into your courtroom and told the truth. He could have sold those documents, could have extorted me, could have made millions. Yes, Tanner said, he could have. So why didn't he? There was a long pause. Because that's not who he is. Bledsoe said nothing. "You want to know the difference between you and Dale Purcell," Tanner continued. "You spent your whole life trying to get ahead, cutting corners, protecting yourself, making sure you always came out on top. Dale spent his whole life trying to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything." The line went quiet. "He's dying, you know," Tanner added. 6 months, maybe less. Kidney failure. He's not going to see you go to trial. He's not going to see any of this play out." Bledsoe's throat tightened. He didn't do this for revenge. He did it so the next Dale Purcell might have a chance. So the next person who stumbles onto the truth might actually be believed. Tanner sighed. "That's the thing about patient men, Judge. They're not playing the same game you are. They're not trying to win. They're just trying to leave things a little better than they found them." The call ended. Bledsoe sat in the darkness for a long time. The trial lasted 4 months. Warren Bledsoe testified against 3 contractors, 2 county commissioners, and a state representative. His testimony was precise and damning. He named names. He produced documents. He explained in cold detail how the system had been rigged and who had profited. He did not ask for sympathy. The prosecutors kept their word. His sentence was reduced to 18 months in a minimum security facility in Marion, Ohio, the same length of time Dale Purcell had served. He noticed the irony. He was certain the prosecutors had noticed it too. On the morning of his sentencing, Bledsoe stood before a federal judge in Toledo. The courtroom was packed. Reporters filled the gallery. Former colleagues sat in the back, their faces carefully blank. The judge asked if he had anything to say. Bledsoe looked out at the crowd, at the cameras, at the faces of people who had trusted him for decades. 3 years ago, he said, I sentenced a man named Dale Purcell to 18 months in jail. I called him a parasite. I told him he was the reason small towns rot from the inside. He paused. I was wrong. Dale Purcell was the only honest man in the room, and I destroyed him for it. He looked directly at the judge. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want the record to show that I understand what I did, and I understand why I'm standing here today. The judge nodded slowly. Mr. Bledsoe, this court has reviewed your cooperation and your testimony. Your sentence is imposed as agreed, 18 months, to be served at the Marion Correctional Institution. The gavel fell. 2 marshals stepped forward to take him into custody. As they led him toward the side door, Bledsoe glanced back at the gallery one last time. In the last row near the exit sat a woman he didn't recognize. She was in her 50s, gray-haired, plainly dressed. She held a small photograph in her hands. Bledsoe couldn't see the image from where he stood, but he knew somehow what it showed. A man with pale gray eyes, patient, unblinking, gone now. The woman met his gaze. She didn't look angry. She didn't look satisfied. She just looked like someone who had finally seen the truth acknowledged. Bledsoe nodded to her, a small gesture, an apology he couldn't speak. She nodded back. Then the marshals led him through the door, and the courtroom disappeared behind him. Dale Purcell died 11 days later in a hospice facility in Paulding County. The obituary mentioned his military service, his 30 years at the plastics factory, his love of fishing. It did not mention the storage unit, or the trial, or the man he had brought down. His funeral was small, 12 people, a minister who'd known him from the VA hospital, a few old friends from the factory. Marcus Tanner delivered the eulogy. He talked about patience, about integrity, about a man who never stopped believing that the truth mattered, even when no one was listening. He didn't mention Warren Bledsoe by name. He didn't have to. 18 months later, Bledsoe walked out of Marion Correctional Institution on a gray February morning. No one was waiting for him. His wife had filed for divorce. His son had moved to Oregon. His house had been sold to pay legal fees. He had a bus ticket to Columbus and $200 in his pocket. He stood at the facility entrance for a long moment, watching the traffic pass on Route 23. Cars full of people going places, living lives, moving forward. He had no idea where to go. Eventually, he started walking. 2 years after that, a small article appeared in the Paulding County Herald. A new scholarship had been established at the local high school, funded by an anonymous donor, the Dale Purcell Memorial Scholarship for Ethics and Public Service. The article didn't mention the donor's name. But the woman who'd sat in the back of the Toledo courtroom, the woman with the photograph, received a letter that spring. It was handwritten on plain paper with no return address. It contained 3 words. I kept listening. She read it twice. Then she folded it carefully, placed it in a drawer with the photograph, and closed it. Some debts can never be repaid, but they can be acknowledged. And sometimes that's enough. Years passed, the corruption scandal faded from memory, the county rebuilt, new officials took office, new contracts were awarded, new oversight committees were formed. Somewhere in the files of the Paulding County Courthouse, sealed and forgotten, sat the original expungement order for Dale Raymond Purcell, granted by Judge Warren Bledsoe, signed 3 days before the world fell apart. The order itself was unremarkable, standard language, standard format. But if you looked closely at the judge's signature, you could see something unusual. A slight tremor in the ink, a hesitation in the final stroke. The hand of a man who had just realized that the person he destroyed was about to save everyone else. And in that moment, in that small hesitation, the whole story was already written. A judge who built his life on lies. A man who kept the truth in a manila envelope. And a courtroom where, for the first and only time, the honest man won. Not because the system worked, but because one person refused to let it fail. The photograph still exists somewhere, the one of 2 men standing outside a hunting cabin, laughing, certain no one was watching. Dale Purcell's daughter has it now. She keeps it in a safety deposit box in Toledo, along with copies of all the documents her father preserved. She doesn't look at it often, but every February, on the anniversary of his death, she takes it out and studies it carefully. Not the 2 men in the foreground, the shadows in the trees behind them, where her father stood, patient and invisible, waiting for justice to arrive. It took 17 years, but he never stopped watching. And in the end, that was enough.